Hey everyone, my name's Jess. I am from the church in Peterborough. Peterborough is a small town between Ottawa and Toronto, for those of you that don't know. And I'm just going to take some time here to talk about pursuing God with your life. I don't know how I lucked out on being able to take the best topic of all, but I did. And I want to just start off by sharing a story with you. It's not a story that I'm not the author of this story, so I might get some of the details wrong. But it's a story I heard, and it is something that's always stuck in my mind about kind of that pursuit of God, that giving your life to the Lord and going after everything that he has for us, and the importance of that. So the story goes, there's this guy, and his name is Bob. That's not his real name, but and he would drive around in his car, and he would have a trumpet that he would keep in his trunk. And he would go around and feel at times that God would lead him or speak to him about taking his trumpet out and blowing his trumpet. So the story goes, basically, he was driving and he drove past this store and he felt the leading of the Lord to get his trumpet out and go into the store and blow his trumpet. So he did it. And when he went to open his trunk, the trumpet wasn't in his trunk. And that was unusual because it was always there. That's where he kept it. But that particular day, it wasn't there. But he really felt that it was God who was telling him to do that. And he wanted to be obedient. He wanted to follow. He wanted to respond to God. So he went anyways. And he went into the store, I guess, and didn't have a trumpet, so sort of just used his hand to pretend he had a trumpet and used his mouth to make the trumpet noise. And it's such a random, sort of weird story, and this is not going to be me trying to convince us to do strange things like this. But the story basically ends there. And I always think about that because to this day, Bob doesn't know, one, why the trumpet wasn't in the trunk where it always was. And he also doesn't know why God asked him to do that. And the significance of the story basically is that when we give our lives to the Lord, when we take it upon ourselves to pursue God and to go after God, we often don't even know the effects of that choice and what that effect has on the lives, the people, the culture around us. We often don't know, the positive consequences of us just pursuing God with our lives and the profound effect that one life or one action can have. I wouldn't be surprised, knowing God and knowing how purposeful and masterful he is, I wouldn't be surprised if there was somebody in that store that day that said, God, if you're real, I want someone to blow a trumpet with their hand and with their mouth in the store that day. And that's just how God is. And I'm sharing this because when we think about that story, when I think about that story, I know that the trumpet wasn't the instrument. The trumpet wasn't the point. Bob and his life was the instrument. And that God was looking to play. And I want to just right from the get-go urge you, encourage you, that when we give our yes to God, when we give our I'm all in to God, when we respond to God in ways that seem silly or what could this possibly do or what could my life really matter, when we take all of our gifts and our passions and our talents and our plans and we utilize them for the purposes of God, when we utilize them towards the gospel, towards giving our life to knowing who Jesus is and what he has for us, The consequences of that and the impact of that is so immeasurable. To this day, as I said, when we think about Bob, he probably thought, what was the point of that? What was the point of me responding to God? But little does he know that that probably had, knowing God, knowing his purpose, knowing his plans, knowing how he works, such significant impact on lives that he doesn't even know about. So let's take a look at Matthew 14. If you could turn there in your Bibles or devices. This is a pretty familiar story to anybody who has read the Bible, been in church for a while. If you haven't, it's a story about Jesus walking on water and Peter, more specifically, coming out to find him. So we're going to start in verse 25, and I'm just going to take 3 points out of this that illustrate a life that is pursuing God. So verse 25 says this: shortly before dawn, Jesus went out to them walking on the lake. When the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. "It's a ghost," they said, and cried out in fear. But Jesus immediately said to them, "Take courage, it is I. Don't be afraid." "Lord, if it's you," Peter replied, "tell me to come to you on the water." So the first thing I want to point out about this is Peter actually says first, "Lord, tell me to come." It takes a desire or a hunger on our part to actually pursue God beyond just getting saved, but that daily life of I'm constantly pursuing. I want to know God. I want to live more fully for him. I want to see and accomplish all the purposes he has for my life. I want to partner with him to experience the life that's being described here and the life that we see of the disciples. God isn't forcing any of us to do this. He doesn't say to Peter, "Peter, come on, get out here, hurry up and get off the boat and come and see me and come and walk on water." There's no force from God in that way. It is a desire, and Peter is responding to the voice of God. He's not just saying, "Let me just try this. Let me just see if this works." It's a response that we see Peter has to the voice, but it starts with that desire. "Lord, tell me to come." And today, wherever we find ourselves, whether we haven't yet given our lives to Jesus or whether we've walked with God for a long time, but just haven't been pursuing, haven't been living to know God more and more each day, we can ask Jesus now, give me that desire, give me that hunger to have you as my first desire, to have all these other things and all these other plans and priorities put to the side. Help me to seek first the kingdom, the Bible says. God will actually give us that desire. We don't have to muster that up on our own. So just encourage you, that first point, to ask the Lord for that hunger, for that desire to go after more than what I've experienced so far, more than what I've known so far. Let's keep going. Verse 29 says, "Come," Jesus said. Then Peter got down out of the boat, walked on the water, and came towards Jesus. So we see that Jesus actually calls him. He has the desire, but then Jesus says, "Come." Peter has to move from where he is. He has to step out of his comfort zone. He has to step out of the place that's familiar. He has to step out of the place that he and his friends even are as he responds to the voice of God. Jesus says many times, we know, to his disciples, "Come, follow me. Come, follow me." And then we see them sort of drop what they're doing and move. There's a movement in following God. And thankfully, so far, it hasn't been a movement to walk on water. But God calls us to move from places that we are, other places. He calls us to leave the comforts, our comfort zone. He calls us to step into the unknown. He leads us out of the crowd that we might associate with. Maybe our friends are still in the boat, but Jesus is saying to us, "Come." Those are all the areas that the pursuit of God requires us to step out of. There's a movement there. And Peter in the story, Peter isn't a failure. Peter is actually, I would say, the successful one. Because even though he starts to sink, which we'll see later, he actually has the courage to step out of the boat in the first place. He has the courage to respond to the voice of the Lord in an environment that he can't control. He doesn't necessarily know what the outcome is going to be. It doesn't feel safe and comfortable, but he responds to that voice of Jesus, and we can do the same today. Peter wasn't satisfied at simply knowing of God. He wasn't satisfied with his life even so far, even though he saw a lot as a disciple. He wasn't satisfied with attending church services or being able to recite Bible verses. Peter wanted to experience and know God in a way that he hadn't before. And that's so inspiring. He gets up from where he is, where his friends are, and he says, I'm going to Jesus. And we can do the same thing today as well. And he experienced the impossible. That wasn't recorded that anybody had done that prior. So Peter wasn't basing what he was doing on past scriptures or other stories. He was doing something that up until that point was impossible. And that's the life that God has called us to. It's a life of adventure. It's a life of joy. It's a life of fulfillment. It's a life of more than we think is possible. It's like Daniel 11, as we know very well. Those who know their God will be strong and do great exploits. And I'm so happy to be able to read this and to say, a life that's given over to Jesus, that is in that constant pursuit of more. I want to know him. I want to see him. I want to do what he does. I want to say what he says. That life is not boring. And that's such an awesome thing for those of us who don't want to live a boring life. Let's have a look at the third point. We'll go on to verse 30. And it says, but when he saw the wind, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, he cried out, Lord, save me. Immediately, Jesus reached his hand out and caught him. So Peter sees the wind and the waves, and he takes his eyes off of Jesus and he puts them on these challenges. He puts them on the wind and the waves. The wind and the waves for us is things that distract or discourage us in our walk with God. And fear and doubt can be one of those things that distract us from our walk with God. Busyness could be one of those things that distract us from our walk with God, or just maybe the desire for other things. Other things are more important to us at times than pursuing God. But we see Jesus is immediately there. That's the best thing. Even though Peter does take his eyes off of Jesus and he does look around, Jesus doesn't just let him drown, let him sink. Jesus is right there to extend a hand. And it's the same for us today. You maybe have never given your life to the Lord, and Jesus is there to extend that hand to you. Jesus is there to rescue and pull you out of the water. Or maybe you have given your life to the Lord, but maybe you just haven't pursued him in the way that you desire to, or in the way that you know he's calling you to. Or maybe you are doing that, but you did that last month, and now this month, other things have taken priority. But Jesus today, for all of us, is there and immediately to extend his hand, immediately to grab out and save and rescue, immediately there to pull us up and walk us back to the boat. Jesus is still here to respond and to cause our eyes to turn back onto him, to stir that hunger in us, to turn and keep our eyes and attention on Jesus. Hebrews 12, verse 1 says, let us run this race with perseverance, fixing our eyes on Jesus. And that's what we see Peter do. So this story shows us that we can't grow in faith in the boat that God is calling us out of, that God is leading us out of, that God is drawing us out of. And for every person, the boat could mean or look like something else, but it is a place that we are in heart, in mind, and Jesus is saying, come out of there, come out of there. We can watch other people step out of the boat, just like the disciples, the rest of the disciples did to Peter. They just stood there. They didn't go after him. They didn't also say, yeah, I'm going to do that. They just stood and watched. And we can watch other people walk on water, so to speak, our parents, our friends, our leaders. We can also read books on people who have walked on water. But at some point, ultimately, we ourselves have to step out of that boat towards Jesus. And I think about my own life, and I didn't grow up in a Christian household, but I had family members who did know God. So I knew enough, at least, to ask Jesus into my heart. And I probably did as a kid, probably several times. But that really never had any effect on the rest of my life or the way that I was living. It was kind of a prayer I prayed and then just went on and lived however I wanted to. But I remember as a young adult, God really, dealing with me and really felt this sense of conviction, this sense of drawing that God was dealing with me that I couldn't ignore. I can't even explain it now. I just knew this is not the life that is meant for me, and God has something more in store for me. And I knew that, and there was a conviction of that. And that's when I gave God my yes. God was saying, come, just like in the story when Jesus calls Peter out. He was looking for my yes and for my all in, and he has it now and then. Mark 8, verse 35 says, whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for my sake and the gospel's will save it. I want to encourage you, if you haven't given your full yes to Jesus, your full, I'm all in, I'm going after you, God. I want to know you more, and I want to experience the sort of walking on water like Peter did. I want to encourage you, that's the best decision that you could ever possibly make. And I also want people to know that there is such a profound impact that the life of someone, the action of someone who decides to pursue God, to say yes, to go after all that's possible, we won't even know the impacts that will have in this lifetime. And yes, I mean, every single life is profound. It matters that you give your yes to God. It matters that you are in pursuit. God has great things in store for those who are on the daily pursuit of knowing Him. So I pray for everybody listening that you would know the leading and drawing of the Lord today, out of maybe the boat that you're in, to the stepping on the water, out of the situation that you're in, the comfort that you're in, the complacency that you're in, maybe the doubt that you're in. I pray that you know the leading of the Lord today, and you have the courage to take that step and pursue Jesus with your full life.